Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you can hear me. Somebody can just tell me if everything is fine. You can see the screen as well. You can raise your hand if you can. Okay. Yeah, okay. So you can unmute yourself. Is it okay now?
Yes, it's okay now.
Okay, great. So inshallah, we'll start the new chapter. Before we move to this chapter, I think let's talk about few questions that we discussed from the last chapter. Because since last week there are many students, they were not there, and we cover in chapter questions for the last one, homeostasis. So first we'll cover drugs, inshallah, this chapter. At the end, those people who missed those questions, so we can just have a look at that, and so those students can stay a little longer, maybe after for 5 minutes to discuss question. But okay, let's talk about drugs. As you can see in this chapter 15, so what are the learning objectives? So first of all, in this chapter, we'll talk about meaning of drugs. Okay, so what do we mean by drug? If we say drugs, what do we understand by drug? And then they have given an example of drug, antibiotics. Why we call antibiotic? This, I think, the most commonly used drugs, especially for serious infections. So we'll talk about antibiotic as well. And then they are talking about misuse of drugs or misused drugs. These are those kind of drugs that are used for other than medical purpose, like heroin, for example, alcohol, and anabolic steroids, and nicotine. Nicotine is the most common constituent in smoking. Most of the smoking products that these days use either shisha or the cigar or cigarette, the regular normal cigarette, or even the electronic cigarette, e-cigarette, they are using nicotine. And nicotine is working on brain. We discussed before, nicotine is not working on brain, working on several neurotransmitters. That is why these misused of drug are drugs of abuse. We also call them drugs of abuse. People are abusing this drug for non-medical purpose. So they have addicting properties. What do you understand by addiction? Have you heard about this term before?
Yes.
What is addiction?
Addiction is when you become dependent to something.
Correct. Yeah, you are habitual. You cannot quit it without medical supervision, without medical help, especially alcohol, and even nicotine. Yeah, smoking itself is not easy to quit. So it's extremely dangerous for the health. And that's why when people think about quitting alcohol or nicotine or any drug of abuse, opium, morphine, so these drugs, you would need definitely medical attention or medical supervision. So in the opening of this chapter, they have mentioned arms race. So what do they mean by arms race? Why we call this arms race? This is kind of like a weapon against something, or you are equipping yourself against enemy, or arming yourself against this certain pathogens. This is why we call it arms race. So they are talking about in the opening this chapter that you probably have heard about a drug which is called carbipenum. And in the last chapter, we already gave opening for carbipenum. This is a class of antibiotic. This is one antibiotic, rather, I would say. We generally call it beta-lactam antibiotics. So structurally somehow related to penicillin. Penicillin is the most common antibiotic that we are using in different infections, right? So carbipenum in this chapter, they have mentioned an example. This is the drug which is most common. Last time I remember that as they have mentioned, all this are most commonly used drug, but people never heard about that. Even many medical students are not aware of these drugs. So if you would like to tell somebody could respond on this carbipenum we discussed before. What is the use of carbipenum? And why it is so special about carbipenum? What is
It is only used when there is no other option left.
Yeah, that is the thing which is very, very important. Yes. That is why in your book, they are calling it last resort. So that is called last resort, right? So last resort is the one that is the last option for you. So one of the things which is really challenging or problematic about antibiotics or bacterial infection is that they are resistant. Bacteria are mostly resistant. You might have seen people having pneumonia or tonsillitis or even serious infection, meningitis or septicemia, infection of entire body in the blood. The germs are there, so it's really dangerous to take. You need to kill these pathogen bacteria with antibiotics. But antibiotics are usually not working against certain bacteria. Why? Because they are resistant. So that is why they are mentioned that most of these particular antibiotic that are used, most of bacteria are resistant. The population of bacteria is resistant to antibiotic. Okay. So carbapenem is also called, I would always say, C for champ antibiotic. This is champion of antibiotics because we look up to this antibiotic if nothing's worked. So if nothing works, then definitely the last option would be carbapenem. But in some developing countries, especially where there's no protocols, there's no control on drug sale, especially also in Indo-Pak and developing country, Bangladesh and Nepal and other countries, the antibiotic control is not efficient. If a doctor would prescribe antibiotic commonly, so even which is when it is not needed, especially in common cold. So you don't need antibiotic for that. If there's just sore throat or simple viral infection, so it's not necessary to use antibiotic. But if somebody is taking antibiotic in that condition, this is called also misuse of antibiotic. Why? Because you are basically exposing this antibiotic to pathogen bacteria. This can easily develop resistance. So if there is serious infection, it won't work. Okay, so that antibiotic may not work if it is exposed frequently. So that is one of the things that sometimes even this last resort antibiotic may have problem. So champion could be also in problem. Why? Because that was exposed. Somehow people misuse that, or maybe the prescription was not rational, and they use antibiotic for common infections where they could have used other drugs. So antibiotics are those drugs that that are used to kill bacteria, right? That's why they call it antibiotic. They are also antibacterial generally, but antibiotics are basically from natural sources. If you scientifically define what is antibiotic, so those chemicals, those antibacterial agents that are originated or developed from natural sources, like penicillin is antibiotic, but we call it chloramphenicol, or maybe quinolones, for example, ciprofloxacin is antibacterial drugs. But these days, in many books, you may find it, these terms may be used alternatively. So antibiotic, antibacterial generally have the same meaning, to kill bacteria. Okay. What do you think? How bacteria can develop resistance? What come to your mind? How bacteria can develop resistance?
Mutations, sir?
Sorry?
DNA, like the mutation in their DNA?
There's a mutation. Very good. Yeah, this bacteria is changing their structure. Like I would say, for example, carbipenem. Carbipenem is working on the cell wall. Penicillin is working on cell wall of bacteria, right? So by inhibiting certain enzymes, right? So these enzymes, sometimes bacteria will produce some enzyme that would deactivate or degrade antibiotics. So it will, you would see that the antibiotics are degraded or metabolized. So that is why even if patient is taking this drug, it may not work against those bacteria that are resistant. So bacteria itself, bacteria have developed resistance. They have developed weapons against this antibiotic. So there's called resistance. And why resistance develop? Because of the mutation, and sometimes the. So do you know how antibiotics work? What is their mechanism? How they can kill bacteria? Do you have you studied this before somewhere, or?
Sir, we didn't study. I didn't study it, but can I have a guess?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Like antibiotics, they're only for viral. diseases, and they break down the cell membrane of the virus. So
Mhm.
then it invades the cell, and then it stops it from like giving any harm, which I guess would be another reason why we don't use antibiotics for the fungal infections or viral infections.
Yeah, so okay, so first of all, when we say antibiotic, they are effective against bacteria, not against virus. Yeah, the mechanism, I think you're right. It do damage the cell membrane or intramolecular structure, or inhibiting certain enzymes that are required for protein synthesis. But when you say antibiotic, they are working against bacteria only. There are antiviral drug as well. They are separate classes. Antiviral, so antibiotic will not be used in viral. If if we had antiviral drugs effective, we could have used that against coronavirus, COVID-19, right? So that is one of the challenge in virus, that we don't have good antiviral drugs. And antiviral drugs are more toxic than antibiotics, and so the use is very limited. And virus actually is producing mutation much faster compared to bacteria. So there's one of the things that antibiotic, first of all, be focused on, that is working only against yes, against bacteria, not against virus. And also we have antifungal drug, that is totally different class. Okay, we have we would say carbapenem will not be working against fungal infection. Is also not effective in viral infections. Okay, so antibiotics are those chemicals, those agents that would kill bacteria. Yes, the mechanism is good. Yeah, you're as you mentioned, that it can damage cell membrane, or it can damage cell wall. It can also damage DNA of the bacteria, so bacteria cannot replicate. Or it can also inhibit protein synthesis, which is required for the replication of bacteria. So that is something which is really important. And in this chapter, you could see the picture, a person admitted in a hospital, and a nurse or doctor is there to look at the profile. And you could see also IV line, maybe some antibiotic is established when you could inject some drugs. And that is also one of the protocol for managing infection. So that's why your book is especially focusing on some people may be more vulnerable, mean they are more at more risk to get infection, bacterial infection, those who are old age, or those who are already sick, hospitalized patient. So there's one of the group of bacteria they have mentioned is Enterobacteriaceae, or Enterobacteria. Enterobic is from enteron. Enteron is basically from the gastrointestinal tract. We call it intestine, for example, enteron. So some of these bacteria are commonly harmless bacteria, but as you know, one group of enterobacteria is E. coli. E. coli is causing urinary tract infections, and also you would see salmonella, which is maybe part of it, is also some Salmonella typhi is causing typhoid. So these are Enterobacteriaceae, and it could be dangerous in those patients, and if they have resistant strains. So if the bacteria is resistant to drugs, even carbapenem will not work. So there's one of the things that many people in 2001 in hospital in North Carolina, when they were treated with carbapenem, they did not recover. So the bacteria were basically making them well. They were very resistant to carbapenem. Since then, carbapenem bacteria have been found in other parts of the world. So there's one of the things that, of course, the resistance could spread if the way the viral diseases are spread. If you could also see that the spread is most common. But again, for example, in America, Australia, and Canada, where antibiotic use is very strict and under strict control, you won't see much resistance there, because they definitely would go look for doctor prescription, physician prescription, not like in our country, Pakistan, Indo-Pak, where you can easily get antibiotic from pharmacy, even without pharmacist or without doctor. So in that case, you will see resistance more common. So the hospitals, they are saying they're now trying other antibiotic to treat these infections. You have wide range of antibiotics. You can see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, okay. In the YouTube, it's not seeing. I'm not sure why it's not showing, but here it's okay. So we can discontinue live.